V, I guess I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about sort of the nature of the show and how we even have all of these conversations. I mean, as we think about this show as, seeking to provide normalization, education, entertainment on sexual topics, all of that is put through a lens of positive atheism and skepticism. So just starting there, how do you even define those terms?
Yeah, that's always tricky because everyone does have their own definition for these words. And even, the dictionary doesn't give us the right definition, just the most agreed upon.
Yeah, and I love being in Facebook conversations and having people debate the meaning of words and being like, guys, you really could have just opened up another tab and gone to dictionary.com. Like, I simplified this debate for you. But when we're talking about these, more awkward-y topics, that's tough.
Well, they're very all-encompassing, too. These are very big words, for lack of a better term. I think for me, sexuality as a word sex is so ingrained in culture right now, and always has been. And so for me, sexuality doesn't mean just sex.
Right.
In the same way that when people talk about the gay lifestyle, they're like, oh, it's just, the having sex part is the only gay part. It's like, no, that's not what that means. It means, self-image and attraction and interaction and expression and communication and all of these things that may ultimately lead to sex with somebody, maybe, but doesn't necessarily have to. It's how you go through the world as a human being.
And there's even a culture component. I mean, I'll often watch a movie and be like, it's a very queer movie. And my girlfriend would be like, there was no gay characters. Nobody was having sex with anybody. It wasn't about romance at all.
Thor Ragnarok is the biased movie.
Such a queer movie.
It is such a queer movie. And the only bi character scene that showed she was bi was cut. We know.
It just...
we picked up.
There's a vibe. There's a vibe. And again, here we are talking about vibes and science and trying to nail some of these things down, which just goes to highlight how tricky these definitions are.
Oh, for sure. And it's, again, the language we use. Vibe is energy. That's
what does it actually mean?
I was just absorbing Chris Hemsworth energy through the screen. It's very ethereal. For skepticism, though, bringing it back to that, the definition for me, and I realize that this is my definition, is just exhausting the list of potential materialist explanations before trying to jump to something that is non-material.
Kind of applying Occam's razor.
Exactly. Okay, so I had an experience. Okay, well, I know I had this experience. Was I too hungry? Had I eaten that day? Had I slept well? Was I emotionally exhausted? Do I have some kind of mental issue that I need to get checked out? Was there... I read this comment once, I think on a previous Atheist Experience comment thread where somebody was like, I was hearing hallucinations and seriously reconsidering my atheism.
Yeah.
And then I realized I was leaking Freon. And I got it fixed and they went away.
There was a more practical explanation than leaping to there's an immortal God who is speaking to me.
Exactly. So for me, that's what skepticism is going down that checklist and just making sure that you can check all of those boxes before even starting to assume other things.
Sure.
So I would say let's go off of the vibes thing for a minute.
Right.
With that, I'm well, why am I picking up that this is a queer film? And I was like, could it be that we are taught that certain looks or certain colors or certain aesthetic possibilities are coded to register as subconsciously this is something that we are doing for you.
Yeah, the position of the camera, the things that it chooses to highlight, all of these subtleties.
Even down to the makeup choices, this character is wearing eyeliner. That by itself is not something of anything, but all put together, it kind of suggests things. I think skepticism is just building that epistemological toolbox and asking why, asking how, before making claims.
Sure.
Yeah. And then I just want to briefly point out, we say positive atheism here a lot at the ACA.
Yeah, I mean, it's built into our mission statement and the bylaws of the organization.
Yeah, and just so the people know, because this has happened a couple times, we're not talking about the philosophical positive atheism, not the yes, we know for a fact there is no God kind of atheism. It's optimistic atheism. It's, we don't believe in a God, and that's great because X.
Right.
That X is what we talk about here. That's great because we don't have to worry about being watched by a super creepy old dude in the sky while we're having sex with somebody, you know?
Right, yeah. And that there is no fear of hell, that there is no, that there's opportunity to enjoy this life.
That creepy feeling you get isn't a demon stalking you. That's probably just, to quote Dickens, a piece of old beef.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, actually. Well, I mean, as we're talking about sexuality, which has all of these bizarre permutations and these fascinating different applications and different pieces, is there sort of like a shorthand, like a smell test or a sine qua non of skepticism, of sexuality, of positivity in your atheism?
Yeah, I think objectively, no. I am just scratching the surface of the philosophy of linguistics right now.
Sure.
But basically that's just why words? Why are words? And I think that for me, it just, as long as I can have a conversation with you about a definition that we agree on, that's enough for me. I don't need to then be able to take that definition and bring it to somebody else, then we can tweak it and come to a different conclusion or another discussion based on our agreed definition of it. So I think that using them functionally as opposed to sticking to one definition regardless of what the other person is bringing to the table is the way that I approach that.
Yeah, so words mean things, but that they are tools. And using the correct word is not as important as getting the job done well.
Right, exactly. So, for example, some of the guests that we've had on lately, I know I was agreeing a lot with what Kevin Garcia was saying during, I think, last week's call. They were using very different words than the words that I would use for the same concepts.
Sure.
But I was able to recognize these are tools that we are using and coming at with different lexicons to describe a very similar thing. And after we've had that conversation about that broad topic that we agree on, then we can talk about the word use. And like,
sure.
Well, what do you mean by this? And would this be considered a better word for it or a better definition?
Well, and it's worth highlighting that that guest in particular, Kevin Garcia, is coming from a very different worldview and perspective, and that we, wanted to sort of scratch the surface on that. We wanted to see a little bit about what it's like on, I don't want to say the other side of the tracks or perhaps the other side of the aisle. And so I do think that that's interesting that even in the words that we use, there's a real challenge to meet each other in that way.
For sure.
With that in mind, I mean, we're obviously doing this show for a broad audience, for folks all over the world, for the folks that are hiding in the basement or in the bathroom, or or the folks that are, needing a sense of community, that maybe have sort of mastered some of these ideas in some ways, but just want to know that there are people out there with these ideas. But in any case, when you look at the ACA in 2019, where are we sort of missing the boat, taking these ideas of sexuality and skepticism, positive atheism, and like over or underdoing it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that we do have, we're very far along, but I think we do have a lot of work to do. I think a lot of it comes from, there is a very loud subsection of atheists who are very vehemently against discussing things like sexuality, gender expression, anything that has to do with this other side of, the show.
Yeah, so anything outside of basically the lack of a God.
Right. Atheism is this and only this, and everything else should be ignored, and this is what we talk about.
Yeah.
And it does have its place. That conversation is very important. But here's the thing. A lot of Christians don't realize that their entire worldview has been influenced by ancient Greek Stoicism.
Yes.
And that was because Augustine, while he was out doing his thing, was a Stoic for a long time before he came and became a Christian. So he brought a lot of Zeno's Stoicism to the concept of Christianity, and as one of their church fathers, used to be mine, I kicked the guy out, we have a lot of Stoicism in our worldview just ingrained in Christianity. Pleasure for pleasure's sake is wrong. We can't talk about sex, cover up. Like any of those concepts that are in secular culture as well come from that kind of Stoicism.
Yeah, I mean, here in America, as much as we are founded under Christianity, which is a very incorrect
claim. Watch last week's episode with Andrew Seidel.
But as much and meaningful as that impact is, I mean, we have to talk about John Calvin and a lot of these other great thinkers that are, again, putting the concept of pleasure on the chopping block in so many ways.
And I think that a lot of Christians or former Christians who have deconverted and deconstructed their faith have done so and then stopped. And they were like, I don't believe in a God anymore. I'm logical now. I don't need to go any further.
Right.
But they haven't deconstructed that Stoicism bit. And you need to keep digging, and you need to keep asking yourself, why do I believe this? Why does this make me feel icky? What do I like? Why do I like it? And that goes way, way beyond just the faith component. So I think that we just have a lot of work to do in the atheist community of continuing the process of deconstruction.
So atheism isn't just about, or the brand of positive atheism that the ACA and the Atheist Experience Network and this show are all hoping to put out isn't just about like going through and line item deleting the word God or Jesus or Muhammad from all these different places. It's actually about ripping out root and stem the negative influences, or at least challenging and replacing with better opportunities all of the different ways that religion has affected our lives.
I would say so. I think that you can call yourself an atheist if you haven't deconstructed, but you're not a skeptic if you're not doing that and searching for the root cause of everything.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly well said point. With that, I mean, as we look forward to the next year of the show, what are the things that you're hoping to offer, to change, to see happen in these spaces?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm still fairly new here.
Sure.
But I've watched the show for a while. I would listen to it all the time back in Columbus, where I didn't have anyone else to talk to about these things. And I'm just kind of hoping that this is a place people can come to start a conversation.
Sure.
Right? I personally am not in a position on this show where I want to deconvert somebody or get someone from point A to point B within the space of a call. We have some people on this network that are amazing at doing that. I prefer to just bump them this way a little bit. Say, okay, this is what you think, or this is the problem that you're having. Why not think about it like this? And then let them call back. Yeah. Let them see what happens. But it's a place for exploration. It's a place for challenging assumptions. Whether that's sexual or secular.
Yeah, and just embracing a little bit of curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that skepticism, so often we put this connotation of it being very negative, very pugnacious and aggressive, whereas I see skepticism as being sort of curious about the world. How do you know? Why does this work? Could it work better?
I would say that skepticism is just as much what is possible as what is not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, I mean, obviously all of this is couched in these conversations about pleasure, about sexuality, about, all of love, for instance. Like, none of these things are measurable. And so as we recognize just sort of the flaws in our language, how do we continue to apply skepticism?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of people approach concepts like love or pleasure as not like unquantifiable things, things that are out there somewhere that influence
somehow separate from the material world.
That is either, love will find a way, suggests that like love has agency
and power.
Yeah, and the way that we talk about these things in our day-to-day, supports those concepts. But really, these things are very quantifiable, and we can measure the impact of actions on the pleasure centers of our brain. And that doesn't make them any less impressive or any less important or any less quote unquote magical. Like you still feel like when you're in love with somebody, like the magic is going to be there.
The experience
whether or not
yeah.
you think it's like this outside force giving you a hug or, the chemicals in your brain making you do the things you need to do. So the goal is not to define these things out of existence or to lessen them in any way. In fact, I find it's extremely helpful to focus on how do we feel these things and why? Because that helps us to do it more. Like if you know, oh, if I do this and this and this, I will feel pleasure or be able to love a person, then that's great. You've hacked the code, Your brain is just another thing that you get to play with.
And there are limits to how far we can really narrow it down, because you point out that love is like a broad word. I'm very glad you're here on the show. You trigger the dopaminergic action in the D4 receptors of the nigrostriatal pathway by appearing here with us, doesn't really have the same meaning as we sort of embrace it's not magic in some sort of like esoteric sense, but it is a really beautiful thing that's worth getting excited about.
Right, exactly. And then we go back to definitions. They both mean the same thing.
Yeah.
We would define them completely differently.
Well, so to have these conversations, do we have to sort of like suspend our disbelief? I mean, do we have to like delete words like vibe from our lexicon? Or are we comfortable with just sort of acknowledging that they are an imprecise application of something else?
Yeah. I actually, and I don't know if I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, I think suspension of disbelief is important. As somebody who is a writer, an editor, somebody who performs rituals, I find the suspension of disbelief to be super useful in accessing these concepts. Think of a roller coaster, right? You get on a roller coaster, you're plunging down a 150-foot drop.
Yeah.
You're suspending your disbelief that you're not going to die.
Right, right.
And
you know that you're safe.
You know you're
but
safe, but you're
feeling.
Still screaming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, I think that being able to say, okay, if I were asked, what is love? How does it work? I could probably, give you where it occurs in the brain, what chemicals are involved, things like that, right? But I don't need to do that in order to have a conversation with a random person on the street.
Yeah.
I was talking actually with a Christian friend, and I was talking about how I don't use emotion to come to conclusions about reality.
Sure.
And she asked, so like Vulcan? And I was like, no. I think emotion is very useful. And in the same way, I think suspending disbelief in certain circumstances or using words like vibe or love or soulmate even is useful in certain circumstances. But it's not how you come to truth. So like a piano is great at making music, but you don't cook dinner with it.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it's useless. It just means you need to use it for what it's supposed to be.
That's not the right tool for the job.
Right, exactly.
No, that makes incredible sense. I'm so excited to hear it.
Yeah.